Hello there, seeker of silence. Come closer to the fire, and let the long road behind you fade into memory. The night has drawn its veil across the world, and beneath the turning stars, old tales still wander, waiting for a listening heart. If these quiet stories bring you peace or guide your thoughts toward gentler paths, feel free to subscribe and walk with us again on nights yet to come. But for now, rest your thoughts and allow this tale to unfold at its own unhurried pace. I speak now as one who has seen ages pass like leaves upon a river. Before the seas were bent by wrath, before towers fell and names were lost to dust, there was a city hidden from all eyes but those who were guided by dream and destiny. Gondolin. I remember when it was no more than a vision carried upon the deep waters of sleep. King Turgon, son of Fingolfin, walked the halls of Nevrast with a troubled brow, for the shadow beyond the mountains grew long, and the world had begun to listen too closely to the whispers of the enemy. It was then that Ulmo, Lord of Waters, sent his counsel, not in thunder or command, but in the language of flowing streams and distant shores. In the quiet hours before dawn, Turgon dreamed of a valley ringed by stone, where steep walls rose like guardians shaped by the hands of the world itself. At its heart stood a solitary hill, watchful and high, as though the land had lifted its own eye toward the sky. When he woke, the dream did not fade but clung to him, as dew clings to grass when the sun is slow to rise. Guided by that vision, Turgon left Nevrast with a small company, following winding paths where rivers curved through green hollows and forests breathed with ancient life. I was among those who walked behind him then, my feet light upon the earth, my thoughts filled with wonder and a quiet certainty that we were being led, not merely traveling. The vale of Tumladen revealed itself as if it had been waiting. A broad level plain lay enclosed within the encircling mountains, their faces steep and unyielding, save for one narrow passage where stone and shadow formed a secret way. There, upon Amon Gwareth, the hill of vigilance, Turgon stood long without speaking, the wind stirring his cloak, the grass bending softly at his feet. "Here," he said at last, "a city shall rise. Not a fortress of pride, but a memory made stone. A reflection of Tyrion upon Tuna, reborn in secrecy, where the light of the Eldar might endure a while longer." So Gondolin was founded, not with clamoring hammers, but with patience, care, and watchfulness. Stone was shaped to echo the grace of Valinor, white walls climbing in ordered beauty, fountains singing of distant shores, towers crowned with banners that caught the light like morning frost. The hidden way was guarded by 7 gates, each wrought of a different craft and substance. Wood gave way to stone, stone to bronze, bronze to iron, iron to silver, silver to gold, and gold to steel, each watched by sentinels whose eyes missed little and whose loyalty did not waver. When the city stood complete, Turgon summoned his people. From Nevrast they came in quiet procession, nearly a third of the Noldor of Fingolfin's house, and many of the Sindar of the northern woods. They passed through the hidden way beneath starlight and torch glow, and when they emerged into Tumladen, a murmur like wind through leaves passed among them. Thus Gondolin lived, unseen and untroubled, while the years turned. Within its walls, craft flourished as it had not since the days beyond the sea. And among all crafts, none were held in greater honor than the work of the forges. I remember the sound of them at dawn, not harsh, but steady. Bellows breathed, fires answered, and hammers spoke in measured rhythm, shaping metal that would one day bear names whispered far beyond the mountains. Glamdring, Orcrist, and the blade that would later be called Sting were born of that age, though their paths would lead them far from the hands that forged them. Yet even as such works were completed, the world beyond Gondolin did not rest. Rumors came, carried by those few messengers who still dared the roads. Orcs were gathering again, not in the open marches of the north alone, but nearer to the settled lands, testing borders, probing defenses. In one city of Middle-earth, where stone walls stood weary and watchmen slept lightly, the need for a new weapon grew clear. It was there that fate would draw one of Gondolin's smiths beyond the encircling mountains. A journey began, quiet at first, beneath trees that murmured with the passage of night air, alongside rivers whose steady flow marked time more kindly than any sun. And though none yet knew it, the hammer that would answer that rising darkness had already been chosen. The journey beyond Gondolin did not begin with trumpet or farewell. It began with the careful closing of a gate, the echo of steel settling into stone, and the quiet understanding shared between those who watched and those who departed. The smith who left the hidden city walked beneath a traveling cloak of ash-grey wool, his tools bound close against his side. He did not travel alone, for no road in those days was truly empty, but his companions were few, chosen for patience rather than speed, and for eyes trained to notice what stirred along the margins of the world. From the first steps beyond the encircling mountains, the land seemed to breathe differently. Pines rose tall and dark, their branches knitting together overhead, allowing only scattered light to reach the forest floor. Needles softened the sound of passing feet, and somewhere beyond sight, water traced its own unbroken path, murmuring against stone. At night, small fires were kindled with care, shielded by rock or root. Flames danced low, casting slow shadows that leaned and shifted upon the bark of ancient trees. When words were spoken, they were brief, and when silence returned, it did not press, but rested lightly among them. The smith listened often, not for threats alone, but for the shape of the land itself, for the sigh of wind as it threaded through narrow places, for the sudden stillness that sometimes came before dawn, and for the distant cries of creatures moving unseen. In time, the forest thinned, giving way to open country, where the sky widened and stars arranged themselves more clearly overhead. There, the road bent toward the south and east, following old stone markers worn smooth by years of rain and passing hands. They passed ruins half lost to ivy and moss, their stones holding the faint echo of voices long gone. Once they paused beside a broken arch where carvings still hinted at leaves and flowing lines, reminders of kinship between lands now separated by distance and danger. It was near one such ruin that they met another traveler. He emerged from between fallen columns, a hood pulled low, a staff of polished wood steady in his grasp. His greeting was cautious yet courteous, and his eyes lingered upon the smith's hands longer than upon his face. When he spoke of the city ahead, his voice lowered. The orcs, he said, had been seen along the outer roads, not in force, but often enough to unsettle merchants and guards alike. Steel was scarce, and what weapons remained bore the marks of many seasons' use. The smith listened, nodded once, and offered little in return. Some truths were better carried alone. As the journey continued, the land grew more unsettled. Paths forked without sign, and tracks crossed and vanished into scrub and stone. At dusk, the distant glow of fires sometimes flickered upon the horizon, too steady to be stars, too far to judge their keepers. They moved with care then, choosing riverbanks where the sound of flowing water softened their passage. At times the river narrowed, slipping between smooth stones, its surface catching reflections of moonlight that drifted and broke with every bend. When rest came, it came in short measure. Sleep was taken lightly, cloaks drawn close, senses attuned to the rise and fall of the night's breath. At last, after many days, the city appeared. Its walls stood firm, though weathered, built more for endurance than for beauty. Torches burned along the battlements, their flames bending in the wind, and below them the gates opened and closed with steady rhythm as wagons and riders passed through. The smith entered without ceremony. Within, the streets bore the marks of long vigilance. Shutters were barred early, and voices carried a restrained edge as though each word weighed the air before being spoken. He was led to the forges near the heart of the city, where iron sang beneath hammer and heat. The master of the forge greeted him with relief clear upon his face, though courtesy masked the depth of his concern. They spoke beside the anvil, the glow of embers lighting their features in shifting hues. The need was made plain. The orcs had not yet struck in force, but their numbers grew and the city's defenses strained beneath the quiet pressure of preparation. A blade was needed. Not many. One. A weapon shaped not merely by strength, but by understanding of what it would face. The smith laid his tools upon the bench one by one, their familiar weight grounding him. As the bellows stirred and the fire brightened, he felt again the distant presence of Gondolin, not as a place behind him, but as a craft carried forward. Before the first strike fell, he closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in prayer but in remembrance. Then the hammer rose and the work began. The forge accepted him as though it had been waiting. Fire climbed steadily within the hearth, not flaring, but settling into a deep, enduring glow. The bellows breathed in long, measured strokes, drawing air through hidden channels until the embers brightened and the metal within the coals began to answer. The smith moved without haste. Each motion carried memory within it, learned beneath the vaulted halls of Gondolin, where stone and song once shared the same air. He laid the iron blank upon the anvil, listening to the subtle change in its voice as heat worked its way inward. The first strike rang clear, not loud, but sure. The sound traveled through the forge, rising toward the rafters, before fading into the murmured life of the city beyond the walls. Those who worked nearby slowed their hands, if only for a moment. They sensed, as craftsmen often do, when something uncommon has begun. The smith shaped the metal gradually, allowing it to stretch and settle, coaxing its form rather than forcing it. Between strikes, he turned the blade within the fire, watching how light flowed across its surface, noting where it resisted and where it yielded. As hours passed, the forge filled with layered sounds. The low breath of flame, the muted scrape of tongs against stone, the steady cadence of hammer upon iron. Outside, wind moved along the streets, carrying distant footsteps and the occasional call of a watchman passing from post to post. When the metal cooled, the smith quenched it in water drawn from the nearby river. Steam rose in a slow veil, curling upward before thinning into the air. The water darkened briefly, then cleared, as if it too had accepted the blade's purpose. In the pauses between labor, the smith's thoughts wandered along the road that had brought him here. He remembered the forest paths, the sound of water moving unseen beneath roots, the cautious greetings exchanged beneath broken arches. All of it flowed now into his hands, shaping not only the weapon, but the intent behind it. The master of the city's forge watched quietly. He asked few questions, trusting the rhythm he observed. When he did speak, it was to offer charcoal of finer grain or to adjust the bellows so the fire breathed more evenly. As the blade took clearer shape, faint lines emerged along its length. Not runes nor marks meant for display, but subtle channels formed by careful folding and reforging. They would guide the blade's strength, carrying force evenly from hilt to edge. Night settled outside, unnoticed at first. Torches were replaced along the walls, their glow seeping into the forge through narrow openings. Shadows shifted, stretching and retreating as the fire's heart pulsed gently. At times the smith paused to rest his hands. He would sit upon a low stool, listening to the forge's quiet life, letting the memory of ancient halls return unbidden. He remembered Gondolin's forges, where metal had been shaped beneath starlight reflected in white stone, where every blade carried both craft and care. When he rose again, his movements were steadier still. The blade was tempered again and again, each cycle refining its balance. It grew neither heavy nor brittle, but held a quiet readiness, as though it understood the work that lay ahead. As dawn approached, pale light traced the edges of the forge doors. Birdsong drifted faintly from beyond the walls, threading through the lingering warmth of the night's labor. The smith set the blade aside at last, not finished but resting. It lay upon the bench, catching the fire's glow in subdued reflection. There remained much to do. The hilt must be shaped to the hand that would wield it. The edge must be drawn with care, not for display, but for purpose. Yet even now, the blade had begun to listen. Outside, the city stirred. Guards changed watch, merchants prepared their wares, and somewhere beyond the walls, distant movement hinted at paths yet to cross. The forge fire dimmed slightly, settling into a patient glow. The smith covered the blade, allowing it to cool slowly, as one allows a thought to settle before speaking it aloud. Another day of work would come soon. For now, the forge rested, and so did he. Morning arrived without urgency. Light filtered through narrow openings high in the forge walls, tracing slow paths across stone and metal before settling upon the resting blade. The smith returned early, before the city fully woke. He carried with him a length of pale wood wrapped in cloth, gathered from a stand of trees that grew near the riverbank, beyond the eastern gate. The wood was firm, yet responsive to the hand, shaped by seasons of water and wind rather than by sudden force. He set it beside the anvil and unwrapped it with care. Before touching blade or hilt, he stood for a time, listening. The forge had its own morning voice. Embers shifted softly, the hearth exhaled a lingering warmth, and outside carts creaked along stone streets as traders prepared for the day. When he lifted the blade again, it greeted him with familiar weight. He tested its balance with a practiced turn of the wrist, feeling how it responded, how it returned to stillness. Satisfied, he turned to the work of the hilt. The wood was shaped slowly, guided by touch rather than measurement. He carved it to fit a hand that would close around it in moments of need, fingers finding purchase without strain. Each curve was smoothed, each edge softened, until the grip felt like a continuation of the arm, rather than an object held apart. A guard from the city came by once, pausing near the doorway. He watched without comment, his helm tucked beneath his arm. When he spoke, it was only to say that patrols had reported movement along the outer road at dawn. "Small groups," he said, keeping to shadows. The smith nodded and the guard moved on. As the hilt took shape, the smith turned his attention to the guard and pommel. He chose metal not for shine, but for endurance, forging it thin enough to balance the blade without weakening it. The guard curved modestly, offering protection without excess, its surface bearing faint traces of the hammer's passage. Once fitted, he bound blade and hilt together with care, ensuring no seam spoke louder than it should. When the pieces met, the weapon felt complete in structure, though not yet awakened to its final purpose. Sharpening followed. He drew the blade across stone in long, even strokes, listening to the subtle change in sound as the edge refined itself. The stone drank the effort quietly, dust gathering at its base like pale sand along a shore. Between passes, the smith dipped the blade into water, watching the surface ripple and settle. Light moved across the metal, revealing an edge that caught without glare. By midday, the forge filled with more voices. Others returned to their work, the city's need for iron and repair pressing onward. Yet space remained around the smith's bench, as though an unspoken understanding held it clear. When the blade was finished, he held it up where sunlight could reach it fully. There were no runes etched along its length, no gems set into its guard. Its strength lay in restraint, in balance, in the quiet confidence of something shaped with intent rather than urgency. That evening, the master of the forge returned, bringing with him a cloak folded over one arm. Within it rested a scabbard of dark leather, its seams stitched tight, its surface treated to withstand long travel. They spoke little as the blade was fitted and tested. When it slid home, it did so smoothly, without resistance. Beyond the walls, smoke rose in thin columns along the horizon, not near, but not distant enough to be ignored. The smith watched it for a time from the forge doorway, the evening air moving past him, carrying scents of earth and river. The weapon was ready. Soon it would leave his hands, and with it, a small thread of Gondolin's craft would pass into the wider world once more. The night before the blade's departure passed with a measured stillness. Within the city, lamps burned low along the streets, their light resting against stone like settled breath. From the forge, warmth lingered, seeping into the surrounding walls, carrying with it the memory of fire and effort. The smith remained awake longer than most, seated near the hearth, the blade resting within its scabbard at his side. He did not watch it constantly. There was no need. Its presence was known, steady, like a companion who speaks little yet listens well. When sleep came, it did so lightly. Dreams drifted in fragments, not of distant shores or lost towers, but of forest paths beneath moonlight, of water moving around smooth stones, of hands shaping metal in patient rhythm. These images did not press for meaning. They passed, leaving calm in their wake. At first light, the city stirred again. The one who would carry the blade arrived without ceremony. He was not young, nor marked by renown, but his bearing spoke of long roads traveled and watchful nights endured. His armor bore the signs of careful repair rather than ornament, and his gaze moved with habit, noting doorways, corners, and the spaces between. They met within the forge courtyard, where the sound of water trickled through a narrow channel cut into stone. The smith offered the blade without flourish, drawing it once so the morning light could touch the edge. The carrier tested its weight, his grip settling naturally. He made a few slow movements, not to display skill, but to understand. The blade answered him without protest. "This will serve," he said at last, and no more was needed. The exchange ended there. The scabbard was secured, the cloak adjusted, and the gate opened with steady hands. No crowd gathered. The city had learned over many seasons that some departures were best left unmarked. The road out followed the river for a time, its waters reflecting the pale sky as it wound through fields and low hills. The smith walked a short distance alongside, as was his custom, until the city's walls fell behind a rise and only open land remained. They parted without embrace, each turning toward the path set before them. The smith returned to the forge, where other work awaited, yet his thoughts lingered upon the road ahead. He imagined the blade crossing bridges worn smooth by years, passing beneath branches that bent in greeting, resting beside fires kindled against cold and uncertainty. Days later, news reached the city. Small bands of orcs had tested the outer defenses under cover of night, probing rather than pressing. Each time they were met and driven back, their advance broken before it could gather strength. Among the guards, word spread of a blade that held true, turning aside crude iron and finding its mark with calm assurance. The smith listened, saying little. As the days passed, the reports grew steadier. The orcs did not vanish at once, but their presence diminished, their movements losing coordination as though their will to press forward had faltered. In time, a messenger arrived, travel-worn yet unhurried. He brought no trophies, only confirmation. The threat had receded. The roads lay clearer. The city would endure. That evening the smith stood once more at the forge doorway. The river beyond the walls caught the fading light, carrying it away without pause. He returned to his work then, shaping iron for hinges, tools, and common needs. The forge resumed its steady rhythm, and life moved forward as it always did. Yet in the quiet spaces between strikes, memory lingered, of a city hidden among mountains, of craft carried gently into the world, and of a blade that had done what it was shaped to do, and no more. The night settled again, untroubled, and somewhere beyond sight, paths remained open, waiting. In the weeks that followed, the city breathed more easily. Trade resumed along the outer roads, cautious at first, then with growing confidence. Caravans moved beneath the watch of the walls, wheels turning in steady rhythm, voices carrying news from places both near and far. The river kept its course, untroubled, reflecting the changing sky as it always had. Within the forge, the smith's days returned to familiar patterns. Tools were repaired, hinges reforged, small blades shaped for hunters and travelers whose paths would soon extend beyond the city's reach. Each task found its place within the flow of hours, and the forge answered with patient warmth. Yet something had shifted, subtle as a change in wind. At times, as the smith worked, he would pause, listening not to the sound of hammer or flame, but to the spaces between them. It was there that memory stirred, not insistently, but with the quiet persistence of water wearing smoother stone. He recalled the long road from Gondolin, the forest paths where light filtered in scattered patterns, the river that had guided his steps through unfamiliar lands. He remembered the moment the blade had left his hands, carried onward to meet a need beyond the walls he knew. Such moments did not trouble him. They settled, becoming part of the craft itself. One evening, as dusk drew close, a child approached the forge entrance. He stood at a careful distance, watching sparks rise and fade. When the smith noticed him, the child asked, in a voice not yet fully steady, how metal learned to hold its shape. The smith smiled, though only slightly. "It listens," he said, placing a small piece of iron into the child's hand, not to words but to patience. The child turned the iron over, considering this, then thanked him and ran back toward the narrowing streets, his footsteps echoing briefly before blending into the evening sounds. That night rain came. It fell without force, threading its way through roof tiles and down stone channels, tapping gently against the forge's outer walls. The smith left the doors open, letting the scent of damp earth mix with warm iron and ash. He sat near the hearth, watching the fire's reflection shift with each passing moment. In its movement he saw echoes of other flames, other forges, and halls long hidden from the world. Gondolin returned to him then, not as it had been at its height, but as it felt in those early days, when stone was first shaped and hope moved carefully through the encircling mountains. He remembered the 7 gates, each guarded, each standing as a promise of watchfulness rather than exclusion. The rain softened as the night deepened, and with it came rest. In the days that followed, word arrived that the orcs had withdrawn farther still, their presence dissolving into rumor once more. The city's guards remained vigilant, yet the tension that had tightened every breath began to ease. The smith received a small token then, delivered quietly. It was a strip of leather, worn smooth, bearing a single mark pressed into its surface. No note accompanied it. He recognized the mark. It was not a symbol of victory, nor of allegiance. It was a sign used among craftsmen, a way of saying the work had endured. He set the leather beside his tools where it would remain, neither displayed nor hidden. As summer edged toward its height, the smith found himself drawn once more to the river beyond the walls. He walked there in the early hours, when mist still lingered above the water's surface, and the world felt newly shaped. He listened as the river moved past, carrying with it reflections of sky and branch alike. Its flow reminded him that all things pass onward, yet leave their trace behind. When he returned to the forge, the fire was ready. The hammer rose and fell again, steady and sure. And somewhere beyond the horizon, unseen paths continued to open, guided not by force but by the careful work of many hands, each shaping what they could, where they stood. As the season turned, the air carried a different weight. The days lengthened, and light lingered along the stone streets, touching corners that had remained in shadow through the colder months. The forge doors stood open more often now, allowing warmth to drift outward rather than gather within. Sparks rose and vanished into the brighter sky, their brief lives unnoticed beyond the courtyard. The smith felt the change in his hands. Metal responded differently as the world warmed, yielding with a subtler resistance, asking for adjustment rather than insistence. He welcomed this, moving with the rhythm the season offered. One afternoon, a rider arrived bearing quiet tidings from the north. He spoke of villages where watchfires had gone unlit for several nights, of roads travelled without escort, of fields worked without the constant glance toward the tree line. The threat had not vanished entirely, but it no longer pressed so near. The smith listened, nodding once, then returned to his work. That evening he took a longer walk beyond the walls, following the river as it widened and slowed. Grass bent beneath his steps, and insects traced gentle patterns in the air. The water moved with unbroken purpose, reflecting clouds that drifted without hurry. He reached a stand of willows where the river curved, their branches trailing close to the surface. There he sat upon a smooth stone and allowed the sounds of the land to gather around him. In moments like these, memory came unbidden. He recalled another river, far to the west, whose waters flowed from hidden springs among white stone. He remembered walking its banks in the early years of Gondolin, when the city's towers were still rising, and every path carried promise rather than warning. Those days felt distant, yet not lost. The smith remained by the river until twilight softened the edges of the world. When he rose to return, he noticed a small mark etched into the stone beside him, worn thin by time and touch. It was an old sign, one he had not seen in many years, a waymark. Not a boundary nor a claim, but a guide for those who knew how to read it. He traced it lightly with his fingers, then let his hand fall away. Some signs were meant only to remind, not to direct. Back within the city, the forge greeted him with familiar warmth. He stoked the fire gently, not to raise its heat, but to keep it alive through the night. As he worked, a realization settled over him, calm and unforced. The blade he had forged was not an ending, nor even a turning point. It was one note in a longer song, carried forward by many voices, most of them unheard. The city did not need to know his part in that song, nor did he need recognition for it. In the quiet hours before sleep, he set aside his tools and cleaned the anvil's surface, brushing away the fine dust of the day. The stone beneath was smooth, bearing the marks of countless labors, each one layered upon the last. When night deepened, he lay down near the hearth, letting warmth ease its way through him. Thoughts drifted like clouds across an open sky, never gathering long enough to demand attention. Beyond the walls, the river continued its course. Beyond the river, roads stretched onward, shaped by countless steps. And far away, in a city hidden among mountains, white stone still held the memory of hands that shaped it, and forges still whispered of craft, carried gently into the world. The night passed, and with it, another day found its place among many. Autumn approached without announcement. The first signs came quietly, in the way mornings lingered cooler along the riverbanks, and in the subtle change of color that crept into leaves once green without question. Within the city, Stores were checked and repaired, roofs inspected, and the rhythm of preparation returned, familiar rather than fearful. The smith felt no urgency in this work. Preparation, like craft, moved best when guided by patience. One morning, as mist lifted slowly from the streets, a small delegation arrived from a neighboring settlement. They brought tools dulled by use and stories spoken carefully, as though testing the air before releasing them. The orcs had not returned, they said, but other things had begun to stir along old roads. Nothing yet demanded steel, only watchfulness. The smith accepted their tools, promising repair. He asked no questions that would bind him to worry, and they offered none that would linger. As days passed, the forge became a place of quiet gathering, not for counsel, but for reassurance. Travelers paused to warm their hands, guards rested nearby, and children lingered at a safe distance, watching sparks rise and fade. The smith worked among them, present without drawing attention. He spoke when asked, listened when words found their way to him, and let the fire's steady presence do most of the speaking. One evening, a messenger arrived from afar. His cloak bore the dust of long roads, and his eyes held the look of one who had slept beneath open skies more often than beneath roofs. He asked for the smith by description alone, and when they stood face to face, recognition passed between them without name or title. From his pack, the messenger drew a narrow bundle wrapped in cloth darkened by travel. Within lay a shard of metal, cleanly broken, its edge worn smooth by time and use. The smith took it in hand, turning it so the firelight revealed its grain. He needed no explanation. The blade held, the messenger said simply. When it broke clean. It saved more than one life before that. The smith nodded. A blade that breaks is not always a failure. Sometimes it has simply reached the end of its road. The messenger stayed only long enough to drink and rest. When he left, the shard remained, placed carefully beside the anvil. That night, the smith did not return it to the fire. He set it where he could see it while he worked, a reminder not of conflict but of completion. As the days shortened, the city's pace adjusted. Torches were lit earlier, and the forge's glow became a steady presence against lengthening shadows. The smith found comfort in routine. Hammer, fire, water. Metal shaped, cooled, shaped again. Each action grounded him in the present, even as memory moved freely through him. Sometimes, as he worked, his thoughts drifted to Gondolin once more. Not as it stood in strength, but as it lived in craft and care carried forward by those who had walked its halls and learned its ways. He wondered briefly how many such threads had been woven into the world without notice. How many cities stood because someone somewhere had shaped a tool with patience rather than haste? The question did not trouble him. It settled like ash after flame, finding its place among many others. Outside, the wind moved through the streets, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. The forge answered with warmth, steady and unchanging. And so the days continued, each one quiet in its own way, each one carrying forward the work of hands that shaped not only metal, but the spaces in which others would live and rest. The shard remained by the anvil, untouched, a memory held and honored. Winter did not arrive all at once. It announced itself in layers, a frost along the river's edge, breath turning pale at dawn, the hush of snow waiting beyond the hills. Within the city, shutters were drawn earlier, fires kept longer, and footsteps carried a slower cadence across stone. The forge became a place of gathering once more, its warmth offering quiet refuge from the sharpening air. The smith worked steadily through these days. Iron cooled more quickly now, asking for closer attention, for timing guided by experience rather than force. He adjusted without thought, his hands remembering what the season required. One evening, snow began to fall. It drifted without urgency, settling upon rooftops, softening the outlines of the city until walls and towers seemed carved from a single piece of pale stone. The forge doors remained open just enough to let the sight in. Flakes melted as they crossed the threshold, leaving faint marks that vanished almost at once. The smith watched them for a while, then returned to his work. As the night deepened, a visitor arrived, wrapped in a cloak heavy with snow. He stamped his feet near the doorway, shaking off the cold, and offered a greeting that carried familiarity rather than formality. He was older now, the lines of long watch etched more deeply into his face. When he set aside his cloak, the scabbard at his side was empty. They spoke beside the fire. The blade, the visitor said, had not returned. It had remained where it fell, its purpose complete. The road it had opened stayed clear, watched now by many hands rather than one. The smith listened, neither pleased nor troubled. This too was as it should be. The visitor stayed a short while, warming himself, sharing bread and a cup drawn from the hearth's edge. Before leaving, he placed a small object upon the anvil. It was a ring of metal, plain and unmarked, shaped from the remnants of the broken blade. Its surface bore the faint texture of hammer and fire, nothing more. "For remembrance," the visitor said. The smith accepted it with a nod. After the visitor departed, the forge grew still again. Snow continued to fall outside, reshaping the city with quiet persistence. The smith slipped the ring onto a cord and hung it near the anvil, where it would remain within reach of sight, yet never demand attention. In the days that followed, winter settled fully. The river slowed, its edges traced with ice that cracked and shifted beneath changing light. Beyond the walls, roads lay hushed, their paths remembered beneath white. Within the forge, life continued. Tools were mended, hinges reforged, small blades shaped for hunters who would tread carefully through wooded trails. Each task found its place within the steady turn of hours. At times, the smith found himself speaking softly to those who worked nearby, sharing small stories, not of conflict but of journeys taken, of places where rivers bent just so, of trees that leaned toward one another as if in quiet conversation. Such stories did not linger. They drifted through the forge and settled where they would. When the longest nights arrived, the smith slept near the hearth, letting warmth gather around him as snow pressed gently against the city's outer walls. Dreams came, unshaped and brief, fragments of stone halls, of water moving through shadowed valleys, of fire breathing patiently within darkened spaces. And when morning returned, pale and unhurried, he rose to greet it as he always had. The forge fire waited. So did the work. The turning of the year came without ceremony. Snow thinned, then retreated, leaving behind dark earth and the first hints of green along sheltered banks. The river loosened its hold, ice breaking apart and drifting away in quiet fragments, carried onward without resistance. Within the city, doors opened wider once more. Light returned to familiar places, resting on stone steps and window ledges as if it had never left. Life resumed its gentle patterns, unchanged in essence, yet shaped by all that had passed. The smith continued his work. There was no sense of conclusion in it, no moment where one task clearly ended and another began. Metal was shaped, cooled, shaped again. Tools passed from his hands into others, each finding its own road beyond the forge. The ring remained near the anvil, swaying slightly when the air shifted. It asked nothing of him. It did not pull his thoughts backward, nor press them forward. It simply was. Some evenings, when the forge had grown still and the city settled into rest, the smith would step outside and walk along the river's edge. He followed its bends without destination, letting the sound of moving water set the pace of his steps. There, beneath open sky, he felt the long reach of time more clearly. not as weight, but as continuity. Cities rose and hid themselves. Blades were forged and broken. Paths opened, closed, and opened again. All of it belonged to the same quiet flow. In such moments, Gondolin returned to him one last time, not as memory sharpened by loss, but as presence carried gently forward. In the way, stone met stone. In the patience of craft. In the choice to shape something well, even when its name would not be remembered. He did not speak of this to others. There was no need. When he returned to the forge, he tended the fire, lowered the bellows, and allowed the embers to rest. Warmth lingered, steady and sufficient. As night settled, the city grew still, not in absence, but in ease. The river continued its passage beyond the walls, reflecting stars that watched without judgment. The smith lay down near the hearth, the glow of dying embers tracing slow patterns across stone. Thoughts drifted, then loosened, then found no need to hold together. Somewhere far beyond sight, a road remained open because a blade had once held true. Somewhere else, a city endured because watchfulness had been chosen over haste. And here, in this quiet place, the fire dimmed gently, leaving behind warmth enough to last through the night. Rest came without effort. The story did not end. It simply continued, carried onward by the turning of the world and by hands that shaped what they could, where they stood.